While my mom is an elementary school teacher herself, she too had a tough time remembering how she learned social studies as a child. My mom remembered receiving most of her instruction through lecture and was never encouraged by her social studies teachers to take a hands-on approach to learning. Although she was never very fond of history, my mom took an interest in the Civil War and World War II because her family members have served in each. The extent to which my friend Sarah Beth could remember learning social studies was very minimal, for she could only remember playing Oregon Trail in her social studies classroom. My roommate Lucy, however, was able to provide a much deeper look into her experience, sharing with me a fond memory of creating a town with her third-grade classmates. While they only learned the basics of governmental elections, she still holds a social studies memory higher than any other she could recall. After interviewing other adults about their memories of learning social studies, I took some time to reflect on my own experience in the classroom. Like many others, I remembered studying North Carolina history the most. Throughout my years as an elementary school student, I proudly completed numerous lighthouse projects and reluctantly rode the school bus for our annual trip to Old Salem. But unfortunately, that was as expansive as my curriculum got. Each adult I interviewed had a tough time reflecting on past social studies experiences, but their stories have provided much insight into what many history classrooms today are lacking: a diverse perspective. While I conducted my interviews, I realized that many children view their parents as influential figures of history. When asked who was the most important woman they had ever heard of, one student answered, "My mom, because she is a lawyer." The same student also told me that his dad was the most famous person in history. I also learned that a student's religious background may influence his or her response to a certain question. When asked who Martin Luther King was, one student answered that he was a pastor. The same student also answered that God was the most famous person in history. This student's responses to the questions reminded me that sometimes children's answers may reflect what they're learning at home. I plan on embracing each perspective that my students bring to the classroom and encourage tolerance of not just religious beliefs, but other beliefs students may hold as well. Because children look up to the adults in their lives, I think it's important as teachers to become role models for their students, instead of relying on the latest pop sensation to do the job. After completing my History Through a Child's Eyes interviews, I learned that children really do say the darndest things. Although many of the responses I received were comical, I was still able to develop an understanding of what children are learning in social studies classrooms today. At times I was very impressed with their responses, but was also in disbelief when the children I interviewed were unable to provide an answer for certain questions. It became clear to me that their teachers are only covering the basics. History is much more than memorization of facts. Teachers should strive to instill a sense of curiosity in their students by encouraging them to take history at more than face value. I hope to collaborate with my students to answer the who's, what's, whens, and wheres of social studies rather than just leaving it to the textbook. For Part C of the documentary, I chose to record my friends' reactions to my experience with the Black and Blue Tour. Courtney and Jackie both had minimal knowledge about the African American history behind our campus, and were surprised to learn facts that had been left out during other campus tours they have been on. The Black and Blue Tour encouraged me to take a much deeper look into the history of not only the university, but into the city of Chapel Hill as well.
I really had no idea, the contributions that many of the black slaves made in the early 1900s, and how much they were taken for granted.
First, I thought it was really interesting that you're learning about this. I wish that one of my classes over the course of 4 years had, educated me on just the history of the university, because it's just not something that you learn, I think, in general.
It became obvious that not every college student on campus was as educated about our history as one might think. The Black and Blue Tour encouraged me to want to learn more about the local history of Chapel Hill. Oftentimes, teachers spend the majority of class focusing on world, national, or state history, often forgetting that local history is just as important of a subject. As we learned in class last week, there are websites that offer a multitude of information about small local towns. Activities shouldn't be limited to memorization of state capitals. Learning about a student's hometown will not only break the norm of a typical geography lesson, but will also educate them on what it means to be a citizen in their own town. Reading Lies My Teacher Told Me really opened my eyes to the fact that some teachers and textbooks fail to educate today's students about our nation's true history. It has become convenient to sweep the truth under the rug and refrain from discussing difficult topics. I found it hard to believe that textbooks and teachers manipulate events to favor a certain race or gender. My friends that I shared the book with had similar feelings of disgust and at times learned something they had never been told before. Basically what you said is like you're not going to cover the truth, like what happened and you'll have to overcome uncomfort in teaching about these racy issues.
Yeah, like I just have to accept the fact that it might be uncomfortable, but it's important to talk about it because these kids are going to grow up not knowing the truth.
Exactly. Before we brush history under the rug, it's important to give children a chance to appreciate social studies. While not all history is filled with rainbows and butterflies, there are valuable life lessons that accompany historical knowledge. Students should learn about the mistakes, tragedies, and triumphs of our history to make the best of their future.